All right, we're live.
Hi, how are you?
Good, Allison. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm excited to do this again with you and Mr. Quentin Cordick in the house.
Sir. Always great to be here, and great to be here with you as well, Allison.
Yes. So I want to touch on three kind of segments today. So the first one, we'll kind of go through like a bit of a market update, see what's happening, what you're seeing from the streets. Then we'll get into like disputes.
Okay.
And I know we had a good conversation on disputes at one of my last team meetings that I had,
Yes.
which was interesting. And then also we'll get into some financial stuff like VTBs. Everybody's heard about promissory notes lately and how dangerous that can be as well too, right? So let's just kind of touch on all that. So we will dive into what are you seeing in the marketplace? Like what's happening right now? What type of deals are you seeing coming through, not coming through, not closing?
Yeah. I always preface this with the fact that lawyers tend to be a few months behind the actual market because we're closing the deals that the agents wrote a little while ago. But on our end, one thing that we have noticed is there is unfortunately a lot more power of sale action happening in the market, where unfortunately lenders have had to take steps to enforce their security and homes are being sold under power of sale. So the reason we get involved more in those properties is the contracts are very different than a standard residential resale property. And most agents will ask that a lawyer reviews the Schedule A. So that's really the only reason that we tend to know that there's more out there than usual. We start getting more calls about people wanting to make offers on them and wanting to know more about how it works.
Okay. So what's the difference between a power sale and a foreclosure? Because there are two different, distinct differences between those two, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think of how to explain it in the easiest terms, but there isn't a way. So just a little bit of background, which you probably know, but just in case someone doesn't have the background, it will make a lot more sense if we start here.
Right.
Ontario is a common law jurisdiction, which means in order to follow the law, you can't just rely on the legislation. You also have to rely on court decisions. So they work together to guide the actual law. So the courts essentially interpret the law and apply it based on their interpretation. So one of the things that the court is able to do is to have an equitable resolution, or it's often referred to as the court of equity will intervene in, a strict application of the law. So because of the way our case law has developed, foreclosure is not really done in Ontario. And we hear a lot about foreclosure.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's very few properties are actually foreclosed on. Like I think the percentages are, somewhere in the range of maybe 2% or something. It might have increased since I last looked at it, but it's small. It's a small portion of mortgage enforcement. And the reason is that in other jurisdictions, and I don't know American law, but it seems that foreclosure seems to be a much larger project there where more homes are foreclosed on. But a strict foreclosure can be really unfair and sort of catastrophic to the homeowner, because what a strict foreclosure would potentially be is that the lender would get ownership of the property and sell it. So if they're the owner, they're entitled to any equity in the property, which seems really unfair. I mean, subject to second mortgages and things like that.
So it happens while the homeowner is still in the house. So they get
foreclosed
foreclosed on,
or first.
Okay, and then so they're gone.
They're gone,
okay.
And then they would sell. They would essentially become the owner for all purposes. They actually have to. I believe they even have to pay land transfer tax.
So essentially, you're evicting the owner.
You're evicting the owner. You're taking full ownership, and then you're selling it, and you arguably in a strict application would get to keep any profit. But the Ontario courts have said this is not fair.
I don't think I knew that. Did you, Q?
From a U.S. perspective,
yeah.
I knew that because remember when that happened in the U.S., right? People basically just dropped off their keys. And
you're talking like 2008?
Yeah.
Well, what was actually interesting with that as well, too, is that when that was happening, and the banks were calling them because people just stopped making those payments. And some of them were actually telling the banks that, listen, if you don't stop calling me, I'm going to leave this house. Meaning that they wanted them to stay in the house, so at least they'll cut the lawn to maintain the property, because the banks don't really, at the end of the day, want these homes as well, too, which I thought was actually kind of interesting. Like I heard that through kind of like stories of just talking to people. So that was actually interesting as well.
Yeah. So because our courts, I know in some states I get the impression that foreclosure might be used because the lender may make a profit. So that maybe is why it's so attractive. But in Ontario, the courts have given so many ways to intervene in a foreclosure so that doesn't happen because they believe it to be essentially inequitable and not a fair outcome between all the parties that have a stake in this. So for instance, if someone made a move for foreclosure, there's all these notice periods and the owner or another lender can give notice. They can request what's called a judicial sale. So the court will sell the house and divide the assets between everybody. So it would be and foreclosure is really expensive because it's a court supervised process and it takes a long time, like 6 months to a year. So because it doesn't necessarily make them any money, most lenders don't pursue it in Ontario because it doesn't make sense. Because the alternative remedy is a power of sale, which under the way things operate in Ontario law makes a lot more sense for lenders. So under a power of sale, the court is not as involved in the process. There may be some steps, like if they have to get possession, someone's actually living there, that the court gets involved. But it's not overseen in the same way as foreclosure. So because it's not overseen, the lenders do have to act appropriately because they could be subject to claims if they don't do it right.
Right. And the lender could be the bank, or it could also be a private mortgage as well too. So
Exactly.
an individual
Yeah.
or a corporation.
Yeah, anyone with the right to enforce that one of their remedies is power of sale. So they would get possession of the property, they would sell the property, they would recover the amount due to them under the loan, their expenses for having to move to power of sale, all of those things. And then any leftover money, they would be essentially made right and made whole. And then any leftover money, if there's second mortgages or anything else registered on title, would get paid out to that. And then anything else would go to the homeowner.
Got it. Now, can you do that privately, that sale, or does it have to go into the MLS system?
So because it's not supervised by the court, the lender would likely have some liability if they sold it under market value.
That's where I was going with it, right? Because all of a sudden now I can get my buddy to come in to then, buy this property for like $150,000 below market value.
Yes.
And really, you're taking the equity from that homeowner.
From the people down the chain. So you're not allowed to do that.
That
would be an improvident sale or imprudent sale. There's got some fancy word for it. But they are obligated to maximize the potential. No, they don't have to make upgrades. They don't have to do anything active like that. But they're obligated to market the property the way a normal property owner would, usually listing with an agent on MLS. And they're obligated to see what they can get the best possible offer for it.
So what changed then from like where things are today compared to the 80s? Because remember the 80s, it was like, oh my God, you can get like such a great deal with this power of sale.
Yeah.
Did something change?
I don't know if it's just been the development of the case law and the court of equity stepping in more, because the fact that you have to protect the equity of the people below you, so any second lenders, lien holders, owners, things like that, it's also a principle of the court of equity because they're trying to make things fair. So I don't know if that has developed and become stronger since then. But, I think the court has done a good job in the sense that they keep developing the law to try and it's an unfortunate situation. When lenders lend, they don't want to do this. When borrowers borrow, they don't want to do this. Nobody wanted this to happen. So they're just trying to make the system as fair as possible for everybody involved.
Right. Yeah. So something must have changed.
Yeah.
Maybe they did throw it on the MLS because I do remember it being on there, but maybe they just threw it on cheap and then somebody'd pick it up boom, and pick it up real quick. And so
because
I don't know. We'll look into that.
The temptation would be the first lender just wants their money out.
Right.
They're probably nervous. They're worried, especially if they're a private lender or something like that. It could be a big investment in their portfolio. So they're trying to remove the temptation to just fire sale so that they actually protect the people that are behind them. Now, if they don't get what everybody expected, but they've taken the steps, they've hired an agent, they've marketed the property, there's probably no liability there. They just have to take the steps.
Yeah. Okay.
And I guess, is it fair to say, Allison, if we had to generalize the files coming across your desk in the power of sales, there's not much equity in them anyways, because from my perspective, and this is where us as agents, people say, oh, I want some power of sales. I'm like, it's not the deals you think they might be, because the lender obviously needs their their principal back. So there's not as much room there as people think at times, because in my opinion, if an owner knows, oh, I'm in trouble and they have equity, they'll get ahead of the ball and put the property on and sell it themselves. Right? Is that a fair?
Yeah, logically, because power of sale is going to incur.
Turn that mic there.
Oh, sorry. Power of sale is going to incur so many more costs that if the homeowner is able to sell prior to a power of sale, they're going to walk away with more money, because the lender, they can charge a daily fee for having to be in possession of the property while it's going through all of this. Like, there's a lot of fees. There's legal fees to give all the notices. It really adds up. So a lot of homeowners, if they're getting advice through the process and they say, I've defaulted, I can't bring it into good standing, I can't pay it off, I can't refinance, they're definitely going to move to power of sale. Someone might say, well, if that's inevitable, let's look at what you can do in the meantime before that happens. And some lenders, if they know the property is for sale and there's an agent and all of these things are being done, they may hold off on enforcing a power of sale, because again, they don't want to do it. They're not people that get possession and sell homes. It's not their business.
Right.
Yeah.
What about appraisals? What are you seeing right now coming in, or are there any issues with that where the appraisals are coming in lower than what the buyer purchased it at?
We've had it with some new builds that were sold during the very strong market.
Yeah.
It's not great, and it wasn't great the last few times it happened, and it's been happening, since 2016 on and off. There's been these sort of peaks and valleys of appraisal issues. But yeah, the really strong market where people bought new builds and they've declined, that is causing some problems. And, the problem, I know you guys know this, but just generally, if the appraisal comes in low and you were basing your mortgage ratio on the purchase price, so say you were going to put down 20% of the purchase price and the lender was going to bring 80, and then the appraisal comes in low and the lender says, well, you still must put down 20%, but instead of putting down 20% of the purchase price, you must put down, well, you still have to put down 20% of the purchase price, but we're only going to put down 80% of the appraised value.
Right.
So now if the difference between the appraised value and the purchase price is $80,000, suddenly that homeowner has to come up with their 20% they planned on putting down plus $80,000. And sometimes the timelines are very tight. They'll go in for appraisals, a week or two before closing, and we're getting these revised mortgage instructions very close to the closing date. And the reason the lenders are waiting is because the market is in flux and they want to get a real value rather than a value 3 months out when it might not be true 3 months later. So I understand, but at the same time, I mean, it's so stressful for the home buyers that they thought they had everything lined up, they got their mortgage pre-approved, they've got all the ducks in a row, and then suddenly the appraisal comes in low.
Right. Are you seeing people then walking away because they just don't have the funds?
Yeah, we haven't seen many, luckily, at our office. I mean, it does happen. We know it does. But most people, they have such big deposits on those builder deals. So if they don't close on the builder deal, they lose those deposits. They have further liability to the builder if the house sells for less. It's a big hit. So a lot of people are moving mountains to try and get this done.
Mom, Dad.
Find a way.
That's the most common mountain people scale, but it's stressful, and you feel like it's not anything they intended when they entered into this contract. Everyone entered into the contract in good faith, but all these market forces are so far beyond what we can control.
Are the builders being flexible at all, or no?
Some are, doing what they can, but, they also need to be profitable and they need to do all of the things that they're responsible for doing. And they're not obligated to really do much, but some are looking into ways they can help, but still sort of meet their goals.
Yeah. It's not like the homeowners who bought previously and had ridiculous appreciation went back to the builder and said, hey, let me share some of this with you. I made $250,000. Let me give you $50,000 out of goodwill, right?
Yeah.
But now the tide has turned a bit. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else before we move on to disputes?
No,
like
I would just say,
you're seeing in
Just if
marketplace.
you're interested in a power of sale property, make sure you have it reviewed before it goes firm. If you can put in one of those solicitor conditions, they're probably expecting it, because there is a lot of due diligence you have to do on a power of sale property that you don't necessarily have to do on a resale property because it would be covered by title insurance. Here it's not. So it is a different process. So just be cautious of them. Get some good advice before. It's not to say they're not great sometimes and your dream home and all of those things, and they can work out wonderfully. But just make sure you go into it with your eyes open, and if you have to do an extra layer of due diligence, that it gets done.